Now we do actually have something to talk about. Creative Assembly has released a Siege rework video for Total War Warhammer 3, along with a blog. We're going to be going through both today because of the time constraints I'm working under. I won't have time to fully, produce and edit this how I would like to normally, but instead we're just going to go through and kind of talk about some different things. If you haven't watched the video, go ahead and watch it yourself. I'm going to be pausing a lot, kind of stopping to discuss various tidbits. So let's get started. I mean, obviously, sieges have been a weak point for Total War Warhammer since even Game 1. And I mean, sieges have always been a little bit tricky in Total War in general. Even in some of the old historical titles, there was always issues with pathing and certain other issues, but certainly some of the promised changes here do look very interesting. And let's just jump straight into it. So obviously this is pre-release, everything's subject to change, keep that in mind. So we're gonna start here.
Should not be an easy undertaking.
I definitely agree.
Warhammer 3 has reworked how sieges work,
which is great. Rework how sieges work, fantastic. I would also just like to point out some sort of non-siege related stuff as well. These blue horrors with their little daggers look absolutely incredible.
Every inch taken will cost dearly. Settlement maps are now larger, and we've introduced more variety of maps than in previous games.
So already we're off to a good start. Settlement maps are larger, and that's one of the biggest things is just, besides the fact there's only one or two walls to assault, the siege maps in Total War Warhammer were just always tiny, especially for any kind of team game. Like in multiplayer, for example, you look back, like even to this day, you still see people playing multiplayer sieges on a game like Rome 2, where the siege battle maps are much larger. You actually have room for multiple armies to deploy, side by side, rather than being crammed all into this really tight space. So already, greater variety is awesome. There was a distinct lack of variety before, so already two fantastic changes. Let's keep going forward. Also, it must be said that this map looks amazing. Again, huge shout out to the artists. They, as always, absolutely knocked it out of the park on this one.
Gate, Miao Ying moves her army from the Snake Gate to Wei Jin.
So we get a nice shot of some marching here, and one thing you'll note is it is a little bit hard to tell, but the balloons do seem to be moving about the same speed as the infantry.
Wei Jin, capital of the Celestial Dragon Empire, is a three-walled fortress and a testament to Cathay's architectural brilliance.
Okay, so three-walled fortress, then already we know this is going to have three sides. A lot of people were expecting full 360 sieges, and just due to the way that they want to represent some of the fantasy elements on the maps, I wasn't sure if that was going to be the case. I mean, you look at like the Grand Campaign map mod, some of those maps are full 360. I would need to go back. It's actually been some time since I've played it, since I'm mostly a multiplayer guy. But anyway, at the very least, larger maps with multiple approach angles is good, and we'll see some overhead shots in the blog as well to kind of represent that. But let's keep going here.
Walls are the first defense against an attacking army.
Notice that a few things. Okay, so first, the crane gunners are on the walls here. That's awesome to see. We've also got the peasant bows, obviously, the balloons floating high up above. It is also interesting to note that it appears the lantern, not the junk. The junk I expected to be single entity, but the lantern also appears to be a single entity as well.
We now have the option to turn the streets into a bloody maze. Using supplies, we can build towers, barricades, and traps.
Okay, so then, like I played in the survival battle, for those of you guys who don't know, I'll leave a link down in the description below. I actually did get to play through, many months ago in the summertime, a battle with Khorne versus Kislev, one of the survival battles, and they've then implemented those mechanics here, barricades, towers, basically constructibles. They're on pre-made nodes, and you get these supply points that you can then use to buy these different constructibles. We'll see a little bit more about that here.
Plan your defense, but
also it gives you more options, more flexibility for defending more than just the walls.
Unfortunately for us Sinch invaders, towers now have wider capture areas, so defenders don't need to be as close for them to be active.
Which is great. You don't have to allocate as many units for standing on the walls, or maybe you don't have to spread your units out full spaghetti line to be able to occupy all of the towers. larger capture area. It's just a small quality of life improvement.
Spread our docked units across a larger area and pepper the invaders with arrows, bullets, and artillery on their approach.
And notice here, he's talking about peppering them with artillery, but we haven't actually seen any artillery on the walls. You go back a little bit, there was this, shot of the rocket battery firing from an elevated position, and we'll see more of that in just a moment here. But so far, it doesn't appear that artillery can actually mount directly onto the walls, which is one thing I know a lot of people were looking for. I myself was hoping for some kind of deployable siege weapon, sort of like what you had in Rome 2, where you could pick to put a ballista on a certain part of the wall. Like, you had like 1 or 2 ballistas as part of your deployables. I guess that's sort of been translated into the tower mechanic here, although it would have been nice to have more of a visual representation of maybe like cannons sticking out of the towers or something. I don't know. Again, remains to be seen.
The might of Grand Cathay isn't
Spawn breaking through the gate there, which, by the way, love the design of the gate.
The walls will soon
A lot of people have been roasting CA for just regular ladders. It does seem a little bit strange that Tzeentch would just use regular ladders. You'd think they have like a little, almost like a little Halo lifter or something, like from the Halo games, where it's just like magically teleports you up more or less. Not teleport necessarily, but just lifts you, or like, what is that? In Skyrim, there's that big mushroom tower thing, the Telvanni, and obviously in Morrowind as well, where you just like float up. Anyway. The horrors do look adorable climbing the ladders
within the city.
So now we're going to go back to the secondary positions, get a bit more about the barricades.
Traps, and towers. We'll need a new currency introduced in Warhammer 3, supplies. We'll start the defense with a base number of supplies and can gain more during combat by holding locations around the settlement.
Okay, so yeah, just like in the survival battles, you hold the different points, and then nearby those points, you'll get various build locations where you can construct different things. And I do like in the UI how it's represented. When you mouse over the point, it shows you all of the connected build nodes where you can potentially put different constructibles that are tied to that specific capture point. So a really nice sort of quality of life
key building and victory
feature.
Points. These key points have pre-designated build locations for construction.
And I must say, another thing that's maybe a little bit disappointing, maybe it's still just a placeholder, obviously game's still a work in progress, but that tower model does appear to be the same one from the Khorne versus Kislev survival battle that we played, which I'm hoping that, they do get unique models for each faction. But another small quality of life thing is it appears that the health bar over that rocket unit there does have these sort of gradients, like quarter, half, and 3/4 sort of demarcations, so that you can more easily judge the percentage HP of your unit at a glance, which is really nice quality of life improvement.
Construction. Once a barricade or tower is constructed, it can be dismantled for a refund of supplies and rebuilt elsewhere. But keep in mind, construction and dismantling is a lengthy process.
Okay, so you will have to time these appropriately then, and also position them correctly. You won't be able to just immediately swap, and I didn't exactly catch the values there. It may be that you do pay a little bit of cost if you have to sort of position your deployables, so interesting. It definitely needs more looking into, but at the very least, I'm a fan of these mechanics being added. It definitely adds more flavor and tactical variety.
Their health reaches 0,
get a nice shot of the Soul Grinder there doing some melee animations, very cool.
Is taken by the attackers. If this occurs, your supplies are not refunded. It's worth noting that whilst attackers can capture points, they cannot build barricades or towers.
Okay, so you can capture the points then, and we'll hear more about that in just a minute. Yeah, let's continue to go on.
Messy brawl in the streets. Warhammer 3's sieges are about defenders controlling the flow of battle, using a settlement's architecture to plan and execute layered fallbacks and hardpoints.
Okay, so the
chip away at an attacker's forces.
Settlements themselves should be better laid out for that then.
With bridges and upper tiers that cross over streets, giving.
So here's what they were. I was referring to earlier about elevated firing positions. You can see this is actually a pretty big difference in elevation. And keep in mind that missile units currently in game do get a missile damage buff when firing from an elevated position. Like if they are higher in relation to their target, they'll get a damage buff. So that's great, and it certainly looks very impressive. Of course, I'll need to get my hands on it and see how it actually feels in practice, but certainly seems promising.
Giving ranged units more opportunities to shine. A good many of these bridges and overlooks are dockable like the primary walls.
And this is
our
fantastic.
soldiers all the buffs and benefits of any other docked unit.
Which, by the way, I didn't even realize, do docked units get buffs? I mean, I knew there was a buff from elevation, but I'll have to look into that. Anyway, very cool. Nice to see, again, from a quality of life perspective. I said that several times, but it's true that it's just fantastic. You know, it's very convenient. It allows you to kind of quickly place things. Sometimes that kind of mounting, whatever they call it, the system, you know, for placing your guys on the walls, historically has been a little bit buggy, but, you know, from just sort of a command perspective, being able to easily just put your guys, you know, in a position to be able to fire and ensure that they have a clear line of sight to be able to fire. Dockable, I guess is what they said, right? Definitely very, very nice. So we'll have to see how that plays into things here. Let's continue on.
In sieges, both the attacker and defender's role are tactically more challenging and more rewarding. Settlements in Warhammer 3 have been designed with more open areas and strategic avenues to hide troops in.
So if we take a look at this kind of overview here, you know, you've got these areas where you can potentially put more archers. You've got, you know, these pretty wide open plazas and streets. Can probably maneuver some cavalry here, although Cathay's not necessarily known as a cavalry faction. And just overall, the map does seem much bigger. It's a little bit hard to tell just from these shots, but
the avenues are the perfect ambush spot, making flanking and devastating charges a more viable tactical strategy. In overview, Warhammer 3's sieges offer a diverse array of fresh settlements.
This is a really interesting shot. Unfortunately, I mean, I don't know if you can put guys all on the sides here, but you've got this one gate defending this avenue of approach, right? You've got multiple bridges kind of overlapping this. This looks like a really strong defensive choke point, you know, worthy almost of the Dowie, perhaps. And I don't know if you can necessarily dock your artillery on these walls necessarily. And direct line of fire artillery, I'm still not sure. It could have issues firing straight down, obviously, but still looks very impressive and mechanically should be a lot more interesting from a defender's standpoint. From an attacker's standpoint, definitely will make sieges more challenging if the AI is able to utilize these tools properly, which remains to be seen.
To overcome and protect. They allow defenders to prepare for a new kind of battle occurring after the attackers have taken the primary walls. They add a new currency to manage and spend on fortifying defensive fallback positions with barricades, towers, and traps which are used to further repel invaders. They allow for a multi-layered experience where units can be docked to overlooks and walls within the settlement itself, and encourages real-time reorganizing of defenses to adapt to an ever-changing battle. All of these features, coupled with dynamic new settlement designs, make for challenging and satisfying sieges packed with highs, lows, and phenomenal visuals.
Okay, so it does appear we've seen shots from a couple of different siege maps then, which is nice. Overall, the changes are very positive. I'll kind of let the rest of this play out before I talk about my thoughts in summary, and then we can go over the blog as well.
The Dragon Emperor is safe for now. Even so, his daughter has barely managed to escape with her life. To Nangao she travels.
So, okay, so a lot of positives, certainly, like, which, I mean, granted, it's not hard to improve on the sieges from before. They could have done almost anything to improve it, and certainly implementing the mechanics from the survival battles is nice, gives you more options, more flexibility, more flavor, perhaps. You know, buildings, like they'll talk about in the blog, also can play into it as well. One concern I have in regards to sort of the balance, I guess, is when I played the survival battle, the towers seemed to be quite strong. And it was very much like I found in my playthroughs of the survival battles. The only one I lost is when I consciously didn't build any towers whatsoever. And I really didn't find myself using the barricades at all. Like, I just used my points to buy units, obviously, because you could in the survival battle buy reinforcements. That was my primary point sink, and then any points I had left over from that all went to building the highest tier of towers. Now, it kind of remains to be seen the supply economy, exactly how it's going to work, how many points you have to spend on various things, how much, you know, the towers will cost versus their power level, and that's why I say it's a balancing issue. Certainly something that Creative Assembly could get right if they make the numbers in the appropriate way. I'm just wondering, is that going to be the case on launch? If the towers are too weak, then it won't be worth building them. If they're too strong, then they won't be worth building anything else. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how the balance of everything plays out, but definitely I'm a fan of even having these mechanics in Sieges to begin with. Let's switch on over to the blog now, and we'll talk about CastleTotalWar.com. Yes. They kind of make a little bit of a joke here about us as fans sieging down their gates. They're now ready to talk about sieges. Obviously, we already watched the video there. They're just trying to make the experience more interesting. Like, sieges can feel very repetitive and grindy in Total War Warhammer 2 as it is currently. So, yeah, capture points, buildable towers. They'll talk about AI a little bit here as well, and design. Significant height variation, we saw that is a big sort of design principle that's being built into these new maps. Yeah, build bridges, which is nice. It's a Creative Assembly out here building bridges and walls, and making the demons pay for it. The fight no longer starts and ends at the outer wall, so they're trying to emphasize the fight inside the settlement more. You know, there's not a lot more they could do to really spice up the fight at the walls, short of doing the artillery on the walls, which I don't know, you know, from a, like, engine perspective exactly how that would work. I think the artillery has to be built into the walls, if I know. Like, I don't know if any historical Total War let you actually deploy your artillery on the walls. Like, it seems like, from what I remember, even in, like, Empire and some of the others, like I said, Rome 2, like, their artillery was already on the walls, stationary. You couldn't move it, but you could go and garrison your units on it. But they've chosen to go a different path here. I'm totally fine with. Yeah, buildable structures. So basically that's the two things, is the improvement of the settlement design itself, verticality, extra approaches, and then the supply system, right? So those are the two sort of main improvements, and then they talk a lot about AI improvements whenever they're doing these marketing campaigns. I'm always taking it with a grain of salt because it's, you know, Total War, and generally you have to wait and see, get into battle. People will always find ways to break the AI. It's just kind of the nature of things, but yeah, I'll have to wait and see, play it for myself on those improvements. But at the very least, we can look at some of the design improvements and sort of early judge. Like with this nice overhead shot here, we see there's a lot more area in this settlement to try and defend. You know, it's kind of like a big triangle. It's not exactly like a 3-wall, but it is kind of like a 3-wall here, with the sort of the big central approach here. I don't know why you would even want to go for the center gate. Probably just attack on these flank gates right here, so you don't have to go through this kind of gauntlet up the center, although it looks like it might go straight up to the capture point at the back. Anyway, so yeah, big idea is for your initial defense to be focused on the walls, as it is right now. When those fall, then you can fall back. Some units can now attack walls directly as they can gates, so my guess is units which have the Siege Attacker trait, which can attack gates, may be able to attack walls now as well. There's a few units that can currently, but most monsters cannot. So that's one thing a lot of people have been asking for, like, why can't I use my Stegodon to literally just ram the enemy's walls down? Well, now it appears you most likely can. Yeah, they talk about the points here. Allows you to create your own battle lines. Each point can be upgraded or downgraded as you wish. So the balancing is done differently from survival battles, which is good. Something I talked a little bit about already. The towers need to be, I think most importantly, towers need to be balanced in correctly so that they are a good option, but not always the best option, if that makes sense. 2 special capture points, 1 key building, 1 victory location. Key building is usually closer to the center of the settlement, provides defensive buff. That's nice. Previously we had defensive bonuses that weren't always clear. Yeah, like they had capture points that would give you like morale penalties or other things. It was never super clear though. The final victory point is still final victory point. So should be very interesting. We get another settlement design here. This one is a proper like 3-wall, although the 1 wall is very small. It is a more of a traditional type approach, and then we don't really see deeper into the settlement with the different capture points and whatnot, but yeah. Obviously the goal is to make siege battles more interesting, more exciting, more varied. Yes, improve the AI, so here's where they talk about that a little bit. Again, take all of this with a grain of salt. I'm sure that they certainly put a lot of effort. I'm not saying they didn't try to improve the AI. I just don't know, you know, it's always tricky to see how much it will actually affect things in-game, you know, what the real-world implementation will be. So they talk a little bit about what they did. They sort of used the 3 Kingdom Settlement AI because it appeared to be pretty well received overall. Implemented some improvements from Troy and other things. Minor settlement battles is a great new feature as well. They're just settlement battles but without walls, still with the similar mechanics, with the capture points, the build points, and everything like that. Flying units and summoned units cannot capture points, which is very important. But you probably still want to prioritize building walls in your minor settlements as much as you can, but at least now defending those minor settlements probably will be a bit easier, you know, without having to prioritize that maybe quite as quickly. They talk a little bit about the Grand Bastion here. Grand Bastion is a single wall fortress, so, you know, some people are going to be disappointed by that. Some people are going to be disappointed by everything, so, you know, it's impossible to please everyone. Some people are not going to like everything. They're maybe Creative Assembly didn't go far enough. I'm of the opinion that we should really just wait and see. Like, I will certainly give you guys my opinion as soon as I'm able to play it myself. So be sure to stay tuned for that here. Here they talk about some of the different factions. Cathay and Dwarfs build highly defensive fortresses. So what this tells us, at the very least, they're going to be reworking, you know, existing factions, sort of old world faction sieges, and I would hope that that extends to all factions currently in Total War Warhammer 1 and 2, but they really only mention specifically here factions that are in the general area, which makes sense. I mean, Dwarfs are going to be in the World's Edge Mountains, sort of in the area of Game 3, so yeah, I would expect them to be sort of on that priority list to get the rework initially. I'm very excited to see the new Dwarf settlements as well. Kislev, this is another thing that kind of concerns me, maybe a point of criticism, and I don't know if this is just the way they worded things here, or if this is, again, very much wait and see, but I don't like the wording of Kislev has tight streets. Yeah, Kislev has long withstood chaos with tight streets, and given the fact I kind of see Kislev not as a primary cavalry faction, they're sort of like a skirmish cavalry faction almost, but still they are a cavalry-focused faction to a degree, and tight streets are not good for maneuvering cavalry, so we haven't seen any Kislev settlements yet. I'm sort of waiting to really judge until I see, but this is something that does cause me a little bit of concern. You know, it's not all sunshines and rainbows. There is some room for criticism here, and again, I don't know if this is just specific wording here that's kind of weird, but definitely have to see. Races like Skaven and Greenskins have more ramshackle fortresses that are no less deadly, which themselves pale in comparison to the weirdness of the strongholds dedicated to Chaos Gods. Very excited to see those as well, obviously. So all the old world races should be getting siege reworks as well whenever they implement the Immortal Empires with, you know, Empire, Bretonnia, Lizardmen, all the elves, all that jazz. I'd imagine that they will also get reworks at that time, but it does appear, you know, given that a lot of the old world factions are going to be on the map anyway, they might even have all the factions on the map to start. I'm not really sure. Maybe some High Elf, Dark Elf enclaves or whatnot. I mean, I guess you have Snitch and... Well, Snitch is Skaven anyway, but you do have Malice and Imric kind of down in the Darklands. Anyway, yeah, we'll have to sort of wait and see on that, but regardless, I am certainly very excited. Tentatively excited, I will say. It looks promising. I guess, to summarize, looks very promising. They've made a lot of promises. Now it's up to Creative Assembly to actually fulfill them in a way that's satisfying, and we'll just have to wait and see. Get our hands on the game and actually play it to get a real opinion on that front. But promising is a good way to sum it up. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this rambly video. If you like this sort of content, be sure to like, subscribe, hit that bell notification every time I upload a new video. You'll be notified. Thanks again. See you next time.